Welcome back to Back Porch Tales and Travels. If you joined us for part 1, you know we had an incredible conversation with Angela Lynch, Director of Communications for the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia.
There was simply too much history and too many unforgettable stories to fit in one episode. In today's part 2, Angela takes us beyond the monuments and into personal stories that make this memorial so meaningful. We'll hear about the treasured artifacts, the moving stories behind some of the memorial's most recognizable sculptures. As we continue our conversation with Angela Lynch and discover even more of the stories, artifacts, and legacies that make the National D-Day Memorial one of America's most meaningful places to visit.
So on one side, we have the Gold Star Family's Memorial Monument on kind of the outer loop of the circle of the plaza. And then on the other side, we have a sculpture called Homage, which was actually the last sculpture completed by Jim Brothers before his passing. And it depicts a soldier paying tribute to a fallen comrade, battle cross. So kind of emblematic of just that loss and paying tribute to the fallen. But a lot of people will call that the Bedford Boys sculpture, and it's not really that, but on the pedestal, there is a plaque that tells the Bedford Boys story, mentions by name the ones who died on D-Day, the 3 that died later in the Normandy invasion, and then the other members of Company A. So you kind of have like a complete service record, and kind of explaining, hey, yes, this memorial, we are the nation's monument to D-Day, but here is that local reason why it is located here. So that's kind of an important piece. And people like to, that's one of the first stops on the tour. It starts at the portrait bust of Bob Slaughter, so talking about our founder and kind of what got this all going. And then it moves on to Homage before going around to the garden to start kind of the proper tour. So kind of giving it some context between Bob and the Bedford Boys and really understanding why we're here. One of our latest additions, which I think is very significant, is we have an authentic Higgins boat now on site, and we just dedicated a shelter for it. We're going to be installing an educational exhibit in the coming months kind of surrounding it, but it was important just to get it here, get it under shelter. And it's not a veteran of the landings. It actually rolled off the Higgins assembly line in New Orleans in August 1944. So while it, is a post D-Day Higgins boat, it is the actual model, the actual boat that would have landed on D-Day. And to have an authentic one that actually rolled off the Higgins line and not a reproduction is very significant because you don't find many of them. I think, I could probably count on one hand after researching the number of actual Higgins boats that are still kind of in existence. So that was a very important artifact for us to be able to acquire. There were 3 gentlemen in Ohio that were private owners of this Higgins boat. And I guess, buddies, let's buy a Higgins boat. And then what are we going to do with it later? At some point, you've got to figure out where's your Higgins boat going when you're no longer going to be with us. So they decided that we would be the perfect place for it. And we were very, very fortunate that we were able to fundraise and acquire that really crucial part of, kind of the D-Day history. We have a sculpture on site called Valor, Fidelity, Sacrifice. And it's, so if you're kind of at the start of the memorial up near the arch area driving around, it's going to be the first sculpture as you're coming up our drive that you see. But, one of the last sculptures that you see on the way out during a tour. This is kind of where the tour ends for us. And it's a sculpture of 2 soldiers. One is dragging the other, presuming dragging the other over the beach. And the only bit of color on any of our sculptures at the memorial is a gold band on the finger of the soldier that's being dragged across the beach. So a wedding band, right? So it's funny because I will get asked by the media about this. I will, see it retold on social media, and we've done some digging to just try to figure out the origin of the story. Is it true? We've not been able to confirm anything. Jim Brothers, if he knew anything about it, he took it to his grave. We just cannot confirm this, but there are various iterations of this story related to the wedding band, that it was an actual wedding band that was worn on the beach by a soldier. That this is one version, that it was given to a buddy. Hey, I'm not going to make it home. Bring this back to my wife. We don't know. Now, most of our historians and educators will say that's probably not likely, because anything that was reflective, shiny, you're not going to want to be wearing when you're a target for the Nazis. So they're like, maybe, but not likely. There's another version that it was worn around. He was wearing it around a chain and gave it to the buddy to take home to the wife. There's a version that the widow, when she found out that the memorial was being built and that Jim Brothers was working on these sculptures, that she brought it to the sculptor and said, include my husband's wedding band in the sculpture. We don't know. We simply do not know. They make for great stories. They really do. So now we have kind of an official script where we say, that the wedding band is symbolic of what these individuals had to lose, that they were fighting for something, that they had families and loved ones back home. So it's emblematic in that way, and that's completely appropriate. I would love for there to be more backstory to it. I just simply, when I get asked by a journalist or anyone, I don't know. Here's what I can tell you about what we say about it. Well, we had just kind of a, tongue-in-cheek adage in TV news. It's like, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. And it's like, of course, no, we want it to be factual. And, when we're dealing in history and truth of what happened that day. So we want to be as factual as possible. I would very much love for that ring to be, an actual ring. And, but we've even had, people that or artists say, well, it'd be really hard to get an actual ring and to mold it that way. I don't know. I'm not a sculptor, so I don't know all the tips and tricks in that regard. So, is it actually a ring, or is it just, gold? I don't know. But so if anyone's out there ever got it out of Jim Brothers, let me know. So I mentioned earlier Lucille Bogus, who lost her two brothers, Bedford and Raymond Hoback, on D-Day. One of the artifacts that we have in our collection is Raymond Hoback's Bible that Lucille donated to our collection prior to her passing late last year. And it's on display in our education Quonset hut, so anybody could go in and see Raymond's actual Bible. So the story with this Bible, both of her brothers died on D-Day. Bedford's body was recovered. Raymond's presumably was not. His name is on the wall of the missing, the tablet of the missing there at Normandy. So it's believed that he washed out to sea. And, of course, you imagine getting the news that you've had one son killed on D-Day. Their family got the news, within hours that a second son had been killed on D-Day. And in the weeks following D-Day, I believe sometime in August, the family receives a package, and it's Raymond's Bible that he had, with him on the beach that day. A soldier from West Virginia came across it, on Omaha Beach after the first wave, picks it up, takes it with him, gets to a place where he can send it back to the family. I guess the address was, the Bible had been given to Raymond by his mother, and I think the address was on the inside of it, and sent it back to the family and said, I know you'd want to have this. I hope your son as well, but here's his Bible. I found it. So that is now in our collection. And, talking about kind of the detail when we talked about Jim Brothers and wanting to get things right, he actually borrowed that actual Bible from Lucille to create the Death on Shore sculpture. So it's that particular sculpture is a soldier, laying dead on the beach with the Bible beside him. It's really important for us to connect anything that you see on site that is emblematic back to actual people, actual stories. And that's probably the best example of it, because that sculpture is loosely based on Raymond Hoback and on the story of that Bible. And you can see that on the tour. You see the sculpture, you hear about it, you hear about the Hoback brothers and that family's loss and the Bible being returned. And then as soon as you're off of that tour, you can walk right over to the Education Quonset hut and see the actual Bible that he carried and realize this is a real person. One thing that I would be remiss if I didn't plug it, because it's incredible and we're so proud of it, is our Necrology Project. So when the memorial, in the early days of the memorial, they set out, this really lofty goal of wanting to identify by name every individual who was killed on June 6, 1944 in the invasion of Normandy. They thought a list already existed and then found out it didn't because there was no authoritative roster. People weren't really that concerned with record keeping when they're fighting a war. So did someone die on June 6th or 7th? What were the circumstances? A lot of that was kind of hard to come by. A lot of confusion over casualties versus fatalities. So our organization decided we're going to create this. We're going to make this list. We're going to set out to do this. People said that's impossible. There's no way. And we said, well, we're going to try. So it started with a researcher, Carol Tuckwiller, who just diligently went through any after action report, burial report, anything she could find to, get this kind of necrology started. A necrology, of course, is a list of the dead, in case anyone's wondering what that word actually means. So she got it started, just, such a tenacious, diligent researcher, former librarian. This was right in her wheelhouse. Got it going. It continues going to this day. So to date, we have identified by name 4,436 Allied service members who died in the 24 hours of June 6, 1944 in the invasion of Normandy. We kind of capped it at that 24 hours because otherwise, the walls would go on and on and on, and you'd have to build a million walls. And those are what are represented on the walls of the plaza. We have the Americans on one side, 2,519 Americans, and then the rest are our Allied partners from the various Allied countries. So we're very proud of that research. It's ongoing. In fact, this past June 6th for the 25th anniversary events, we were able to dedicate 14 names to that wall. So it's just kind of research. John Long, who's our director of education, now heads up the necrology program. We have a searchable database on our website and also on our app. So, there's one thing that's really touching with the wall names. We'll get relatives or just, people that are interested in this gentleman from my hometown who will come to the site and want to see their name on the wall, want to do an etching. So that's all available there in the app for them to look up and figure out which plaque do I go to. So we're really proud of that research because it's a resource for, for those families to make those connections, but also for school children, for journalists, anybody that's looking into the D-Day story. We get calls pretty much every June 6th from a journalist in whatever state. Hey, can you tell me how many people from Iowa died on D-Day or New York died on D-Day? And so John can kind of go into that record, tune it. And so basically, whenever we have evidence that someone is a June 6th fatality as opposed to some other point during the invasion of Normandy, when that research warrants it, we get their name added to our roster and to our wall. So it's actually the world's most complete list of D-Day fallen. So we currently are open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. The last tour goes out around 4:30. I will mention, because we're doing this recording in hotter weather, it does get quite hot in Bedford, Virginia during the summer, and we're an outdoor site. So the guided tours may be suspended if, there's a high heat index, but we're still open. Individuals can come up. We have a location aware map in our app that can help them with guided tours. We have walking tour brochures. So even if we're not offering tours, please come on up, drink lots of water, take advantage of the shade where you can. But being a large outdoor site with a lot of concrete, we have to kind of keep that safe. During the winter months, we close on Mondays just to kind of give us a day to regroup and get ready for the busy season. And of course, the water effects are off, so nothing freezes and busts during the winter months. So really, like, spring into summer and fall are kind of the best times, I think, to come visit. If you're someone who loves, leaf peeping and you get on the parkway and do all that, come see us like in October when the leaf forecast is out, because all of the beautiful mountains, the Blue Ridge behind us, that's emblematic of, the home front and the mountains that everyone who grew up in this area saw all their lives before they went off to war. It's just beautiful. So you get up there. I mean, you see how pretty it is when it's green out, but imagine all those leaves turning. And we're right off the parkway, just a few miles off the parkway. So that makes for just a really kind of fun day trip. We get a lot of interest in October. As I mentioned before, we're not a National Park Service site, so we operate solely on private funding, donations, and admissions. So our tickets start at $15, and then there are various price points there's discounts for veterans, for children. World War II veterans, active duty military, always free. And then during the summer months from Armed Forces Day to Labor Day, we participate in the Blue Star Museums program. So active duty families receive free admission. I think there's a certain number, I think up to 5, the service member and their family get in free at museums all across America. And we are one of them. We're really proud to be part of that program and to offer that. We don't have a huge active duty population in the Bedford area, but we do get a lot of folks that are kind of, passing through on their way to other places. So it's nice to be able to take part in that and, do something nice for our active duty military families.
Well, I tell you what, Melanie, one of the things that I found so fascinating with the pictures and the videos and Angela's stories is really the sculptures. In this day of digital art, digital media, 4K resolution cameras, pictures, it's just amazing what those sculptures make you feel when you see them. Even in a picture, something magical about sculpture and what they did there at the D-Day Memorial.
I agree. Looking at the person who died on the beach, I think it's Death on the Beach is the name of the sculpture. It's kind of a little macabre, but the fact that the Bible in that sculpture was actually Raymond Hoback's Bible, who died on the beach, and the attention to detail. I think what happened is in these sculptures, the people were captured within it. The spirit of what they endured is so strong. When you're looking at these sculptures, you're actually looking at the people. They're inspired by the people, and the look on the faces, the strain, the shape of the body, the one where the soldier is pulling the other one across the beach. I mean, it's so exacting. It's like a snapshot of the real thing that's there to pay tribute to those sacrifices. But I agree. I think there's something and maybe it's the meditation that comes from standing and just spending time with a sculpture. A lot of times when you look at a picture or even when you watch a video, it flashes by so fast and you can appreciate what you're learning. I would even say the video, we have a little bit of video in this series it's the actual D-Day footage that kind of juxtaposed against the sculptures. When I was editing and I did that, like we see the Higgins boat, the real one, and then we see the Higgins boat on the beach tableau, and then we see the Ranger statue climbing the wall, and then we see the picture of the actual Rangers on the wall, and kind of being able to, I know this is kind of jumping back to part 1, but since we're talking about sculptures, being able to kind of move between the sculpture and the real thing, I think it helps us to kind of grasp the reality of this experience and the impressiveness of the sculpture to convey that to us in a way that allows us to kind of stop in a way that we don't usually, like you were saying, with everything being flashy and video and pictures, that there's just something about being present with a sculpture that captures what really happened. It's hard to put into words, really.
And then all the sculptures being that gray, no color. Freezes, it's that time and moment that's frozen. And then, of course, the wonderful story about the only piece of color on all the sculptures is the wedding band. And, Angela talks about, well, we don't know if it's the true story or not. and I have to bring this up because it's a quote from a movie. Secondhand lines. Robert Duvall, one of my favorite actors, he's playing a character Hub, and I'm going to read this so I get it correctly. And he's telling a young man, sometimes the things that may or may not be true are the things a man needs to believe in the most. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. You see, a man should believe in those things because those are the things worth believing in. And it doesn't matter if that wedding band story is true or not. It needs to be true. We need to believe that that's what they were fighting for. And they were fighting for that. They were fighting for their family back home. And it also shows that sacrifice of what he gave up for his family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's almost like a fun fact. Or even just trivia, to be honest. I mean, as important as it would be if it were actually a ring that was on the beach. Of course, I'm not taking away from that. But I think what it symbolizes is so intense and so much bigger than even just a ring. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to be able to look at that one piece of gold within, like you said, this very brown and dark statue, it really highlights the sacrifice and this, and that's what's so impressive about everything they did at this memorial. It's everything they did, the way they laid it out, the structures of it, the arch. I love that they did the stripes to match the stripes on the bottom of the planes that said, hey, you know, so when you look up at the planes, you knew they were on your side, and you look up at the arch, and just the symbolism is incredible. And the people who worked on this are just, and again, I love it that in part one, she talks about, it's just kind of, you know, it was birthed at a barbecue, you know, Bob Slaughter being the first veteran to really bring it up and push for it. And of course, he was there at the dedication right there with President Bush. Yeah, it's just if it doesn't tug at your heart, you need some therapy because it's just.
Well, and let me tell you, you know, the one story they know is true is the story of the Bible, and it's there. The Bible, and what was remarkable, it's not well, the Bible itself is remarkable, but the story behind how it got there. Just think, okay, after this horrific event in battle, a West Virginia serviceman sees that Bible laying on the beach, takes it, and eventually mails it back to the family.
Yeah. And the address was in it, so he could. Yes. I mean, that was a very fortuitous. I noticed in the letter to them, he's like, well, I hope he's doing well. Here's his Bible. So he did not know, you know, anything about Raymond other than, and again, I think it goes back to what we talked about before in our last episode. And if you haven't watched part one, you've got to go back and watch part one because this episode is really meaningful, but there's so much setup as to what you're looking at in part one. We talked about all of the different ways that there's a lot of divine destiny in that God's hand was really involved in this. And I think that this is just another example of a long list of examples of why you're looking at something that the divine orchestrated from the moment that Raymond fell on the beach and dropped that Bible. It's just amazing.
And also another story of destiny of them acquiring the Higgins boats or the Higgins boat they have that are working on the display and stuff. And, you know, we all know that opening scene in Saving Private Ryan is on a Higgins boat.
Yeah.
And to think those Bedford boys, unfortunately, some of them, the last experience they had here on this earth was in that Higgins boat. Because as soon as the door opened, so many of them died just either immediately or just moments later on the beach. So, you know, the Higgins boat is an important part. And I'm so glad they got a original one original to the battle itself, but it's an original Higgins boat to go along with just, you know, how the monument and memorial is set up and how you go from the Higgins boat to their struggle through the water, to the beach, to climbing the cliffs. Amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I think being able to stand next to one of the boats that was actually built at the time intended for that purpose. It's like I was saying with the statue, it gives you a moment to pause and just be there with it, which is very different than watching it up on a movie screen. It just is. And that's the reason why these memorials are so important. I mean, we might be able to say, oh, well, we can read a book or we can watch a movie and you know, the history is being preserved. Yeah. But there's just something ethereal about going to a memorial where you're just present with the spirit of it that you just can't capture any other way.
And then here's another thing that I found remarkable, and I'll kind of end my part of this with it, is how they're still finding names. I mean, 1944 was a long time ago, and they're still doing the research and how important that work is to make sure they get all the names up there that made that sacrifice, because they deserve it. They deserve to be remembered, you know.
And it, you know, you could tell from the way Angela was sharing that at the beginning, when they were deciding to do it, it seemed like an impossible task. They were like, okay, good luck with that. But and I think it shows the value of every individual to not just honor the sacrifice of the whole, but the individuals. And we need to do that. And I think that goes back to what she was talking about, like when she talked about their podcast, which is also in part one. They have a podcast. Go learn about that if you haven't watched it. And she said, well, what's left to tell? You know, 80 years later, what's left to tell? And she's like, it's incredible. And I was noticing she talked about they interview authors and historians and researchers, and they all pick a niche. So it's not like the grand World War II, you know, larger picture that we are all familiar with. It's the little tiny details that when you hear them, you're just in awe. And that's how I felt when I walked through that National World War II Museum. There were so many details in that I did not know. And I thought, wow. And I consider myself a pretty big, you know, I don't know if fan is the right word, but what's the right word when you love
Definitely
history?
historian. Yes.
Yeah,
historian.
I'm very fond of war history and I think it's just because there's so much love and sacrifice for someone to give their life and to face the fear of stepping off a Higgins boat onto a beach if it is so critical that we keep awe and reverence for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful episode, Melanie. So glad to have done it. And so glad Angela joined us. Really am. Wonderful story.